We got a new lens in here today. This is the Sigma 28-45 DGDN. It comes in Sony E-mount, which I have here, and also L-mount. And I believe it's supposed to be the spiritual successor to Sigma's famous 18-35 APS-C lens that was also f1.8, which this lens is as well. For disclosure, Sigma did lend me this lens. I have early access to it. It is a loaner. I send it back. Sigma did not sponsor this video monetarily. I don't receive any funds, and Sigma doesn't get to preview this video or have any input on it. This video does have an actual sponsor though, and that is Sennheiser's new Evolution wireless digital portable ENG set, which has the SKP module that goes on the back of microphones. And we're gonna talk more about that a little bit later in the video. We're taking a quick look at the build and some of the features. At the bottom here, we have an aperture ring, which you can see goes from f1.8 to f16. There is the ability to lock it to the A mode if you want to keep it on just camera control. And there's also the ability to click and declick it. And then we have a zoom ring, which again goes from 28 to 45. It has a definite weight to it. It feels like we're moving some heavy glass elements when we turn that, but it feels nice. And then there's obviously the focus ring, which again, like most of the Sigma lenses, it's a very well dampened focus ring. Two function buttons, one there and one there on either side of the ART symbol. And the front filter thread is an 82mm. Now, size and weight-wise, it is a big lens. For comparison, here is a Sony 24-70 G Master, and here is the Sigma 28-45. It is significantly taller. Now, this one has an internal zoom though, so this is as tall as it's gonna get. And if we extend the 24-70, you can see they're about the same size as the 24-70 extended, but there is a significant weight difference. This lens weighs 950 grams for this Sony version and 960 grams for the L-mount, which is over 2 pounds. Now, jumping back to that focus ring, it's very similar to a lot of the, focus by wire mirrorless lenses that Sigma's released in the last couple of years, which is going to be one of the biggest departures if you are comparing this to the 18-35 original, is that one was for DSLR, so it had a much different feel when it comes to manual focusing. This one, however, is like the Sigma 24-70 and that kind of thing, where it has a very long throw, but it's non-linear. So manual focus for photography actually feels really good because if, it's speed-based. So if you turn it very slowly, you can really precisely dial in the manual focus. And again, you have a really long throw. But repeatable focus for video is very difficult to do because if you turn it quickly and then turn it slowly, you're going to be completely different spots. Autofocus-wise, this lens also got a significant upgrade over the 18-35 and is more in line with the latest 24-70 Mark II from Sigma, where it's using their HLA, their high-speed linear motors. So you're gonna get fast, quiet, and smooth autofocus performance. And when I tested it, again, really, really snappy going from minimum to infinity, and it kept up with anything that I was tracking with it. And if we are still comparing it to the Sigma 18-35 original, it is much faster, smoother, and quieter than that. However, it does exhibit some focus breathing. You can see that whether you're at 28 or 45, there is some. And if you don't know what focus breathing is, it's when the image looks like it's zooming in and out slightly as you focus from minimum to infinity. And speaking of focusing at minimum, the close focusing distance on this one is 0.3 meters or 0.98 feet. So pretty much exactly 1 foot. And what's interesting about that is it doesn't change whether you're at 28 or 45. So as you're gonna see in the test images in a second, at 45, you're gonna get closer than you are at 28 because you can't move the lens any closer. And that might be my biggest grievance when it comes to just walking around with this lens. I always kind of wished that I could get just a little bit closer. It's purely, preferential. If you're using the lens for something completely different, if you're using it for more like 35 and more environmental, 28, doing some more, wider establishing kind of things, it's not gonna matter. But if you I wouldn't buy this as a walk around lens and trying to get up close and stuff, because it always feels like you're just not quite as close as you'd like to be. So that's not what I would get this lens for. Okay, now I'm gonna pull up Lightroom and show you the sample images that I gathered to test, the lens quality. But before that, I would like to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, the Sennheiser EWDP ENG set, which I'm actually kind of in love with. In fact, the whole first part of this video was recorded using this little module here, the SKP. I attached it to the back of my Sennheiser MKH50, which is a mic that you probably all know I've been loving for years and using. I also used the receiver and connected it to my Zoom F6 because there's an XLR attachment there. The connection was super simple and easy, but what I didn't realize, honestly, until I tested it, was that the SKP module can record 32-bit float onto a micro SD card attached to it while simultaneously transmitting to the receiver that can record on my Zoom F6. And you can do this even in the US. It's not restricted regionally. And obviously it comes with a body pack as well if you want to wear a lav and do the same thing. Now you can't record 32-bit float into the body pack. That's more of just an SKP thing. But The SKP part even has a locking 3.5mm thread on the bottom if you wanted to use it as a body pack instead, and then I guess you could record your lav that way. But honestly, I'm just in love with the fact that I can just take this little device, stick it on the back of my microphone, and record 32-bit float audio without needing to run an XLR cable all over the place. It's a really, really great little device. And by the way, I'm back to an XLR cable like I mentioned. Did you hear a difference between this part and the beginning of the video? All right, let's get into Lightroom and show you the sample images. All right, let's start with some chromatic aberration. This is for longitudinal chromatic aberration, or Bokeh, which is when you get fringing on areas as they go out of focus to the foreground and background. We do this wide open because really the only way to solve Bokeh is by stopping down. And if you shoot at one point and it has Bokeh, it's hard to remove it in post. I am seeing just a hint of a cyan color going this way, and not much of anything this way. Normally it would be sort of like the opposite color, which would be kind of like a red magenta tone. And I'm not really seeing much of that here. Let's take a look at the 45mm side. Oh, interesting, the colors actually change at 45mm. Now we're getting more of like a lime color up here and purple down here. And it seems like maybe at 45mm it's slightly worse than it is at 28mm. But in both cases, honestly, this is pretty minimal longitudinal chromatic aberration. It's not perfect, but if you shoot not punched in, it looks black and white, and that's good. And I have a shot here of a fence to test the same thing, but in a real world sample and not of a chart. And same thing, just really, really, really minor amounts of Bokeh in each direction, but I wouldn't complain about this too much at all. Now let's look at the Bokeh. So we have an 11-bladed iris on this lens, and this is 28mm at f1.8. And you can see there is some cutting in the corners. Let's punch in here. And yeah, it's very round, very smooth, and not a whole lot going on in terms of, you know, ringing or outer membrane or anything. I think it looks pretty good. Up next, we have the 45mm at 1.8, which we have much worse cat's eye going on. In fact, there's not a single orb here that isn't affected by it in the top row. The next shot, if we bring it down into the center, then you can get some perfectly round ones. And again, really nice. You know, there's a little bit of busyness going on here, a little bit of ringing, but it's not too bad at all. But the cat's eye is pretty severe at 45. Look, even in the midline, and not even all the way to the edge. Now, if we stop down to around f4, then they mostly round out. And here's where you can see your 11 iris blades. And if you want to see some of that bokeh in a real environment, this is outside, shooting some trees with some light cutting through. And you can see again, you know, the cat's eye is present here, and it does create a little bit of a swirly sensation at 45mm, but I would say it's otherwise pleasing. And as far as transitions, if we look here, this is a nothing burger shot, but it's just to show you the transitions along the edge here and across the top, and then how that plays with the background that's quite separated from it. And again, we're getting a bit of a swirly action, but I'd say the rendering is quite pleasing. Now, jumping back to that close focusing situation here, I actually was at 29.4. I didn't realize. I thought I was at 28, but this is about as close as you can get on the wide end. And if we take a look at the sharpness while focused as close, it's very, very good. So that's not a concern there. And aberration and fringing is not an issue on the text here. And then at 45mm, it's closer. Very, very sharp and doesn't suffer from much in the way of fringing or aberration on that center target there. So it looks great. And then my last little test here on the close focusing, again, with sort of a real world example. And if we punch right in, we can see even the little strand or whatever this little hair thing is really sharp. Everything looks really good. Look at the detail over here in the little plant fibers. I mean, it's excellent. So you can get excellent results close focusing. I just wish I could get a little bit closer. That's really my only criticism about that. And then I also tested it for Parfocalness, if you will, which is the lens's ability to focus at one end of the zoom, and then when zooming, does it keep focus or does it lose focus? And so this is focused at 45mm. You can see we're nice and sharp. And then if we zoom to 28 without changing our focus, it gets a little bit soft. Not the worst I've ever seen, but it certainly isn't parfocal. And if we went the other way, if we focus at 28 and then zoom to 45, again, not fully sharp. Here we've got some flare examples. Just like the previous Sigma lens that I reviewed, the flare is extremely well controlled. You can see that our blacks are still pretty black. There is, a couple artifacts here, but it's not too bad. I've done some lenses where you just get like ghosting and artifacts all the way down. So pretty good flare control. This is at 45. And at 28, same thing. You can see the area of the frame that's affected right here, but your areas that are outside of that still maintain pretty good contrast. And even the areas that are affected aren't that muddy, which is great to see. I also have some Sunstars here if you're into that. This is at the minimum aperture, which is f16 on this lens. And, we're getting decent results. If you're into, seeing your little spiky Sunstars, that's what they look like. Let's talk about vignetting and distortion. You can see there definitely is some. What's interesting is it flips. So on the 45mm side, you can see we're getting pincushion distortion here. And then on the 28mm side, it switches to a little bit of barrel distortion. There is a focal length somewhere in between where the distortions kind of equalize and you get straight lines. Now, Sigma did send over the lens correction profiles to go along with this lens, so I could test those. And so if we apply that on here to see what it would look like, it does do a great job of straightening up the lines. The one thing I noticed though is that I feel like it overcompensates for peripheral illumination, so for vignetting. So if we reset this to the default at 100, it's actually brightening up the corners more than it needs to. And I find that setting it down to about 50 gives you a better result if you're using these profiles. And then with that vignetting, I wanted to compare 1.8 to f5.6 to see if there's a significant difference. So this is with no profiles enabled. This is at 1.8 and then 5.6. You can see that it is a little bit darker in the periphery on the 1.8 and it does get a little bit better at 5.6, but it's not huge. It's not a huge deal, which again is why I think the correction in the lens profile is actually sort of overcooked. Let's jump over here. I just have a brick wall, which again, you can see the pin cushion at 45 and the barrel at 28. It's kind of funny flipping back and forth. But we can also use it to see how the sharpness plays across the frame. So if we punch in here on the 45mm and we take a look, really outstanding detail. Look at all these little bits here. And as we go down toward the corner, it does get slightly worse. I can see a little bit of softness here, but it's not too bad at all. And I looked at the MTF charts for this lens and they're actually outperforming. So if you shoot this 28 to 45 at its 1.8, so it's wide open, and compare it to Sigma's 1.4 art lenses at their 1.4, this outperforms them when each lens is wide open. And if we jump to the 28, same thing. We're getting incredible detail in the center. And as we scroll down to the corner, you can see that it really doesn't even become noticeable until all the way down here, because this part looks great, this part looks great. So it's like really just the extreme of the peripheral, which does line up with what I saw with the MTF charts. So really, really good sharpness. And I have an example here of some rocks to show you again that same thing, but also talk a little bit more about the vignetting because I think this is important for Sigma to see. So this is at 1.8, and then this is at f4. And you can see at f4, the vignetting is definitely gone. So if we go back to the 1.8 and then apply the lens corrections, we can see that it gets too bright on the edge. Look, back at the f4, and then back to the 1.8. So this is why I would suggest dropping this down to about 50, so half the power of the vignetting correction. And then now if we switch to the f4 and then the 1.8, they're very, very similar now. And then if we compare the sharpness between that 1.8 and the f4 version, and we look here, we can see in the center, you're not really gaining much, in my opinion, by stopping down. Maybe the f4 is a little bit better. And then what about in the corner? Yeah, so you do gain a little bit by stopping down in the corner, but it's not that much. Like the lens performs very well wide open. So overall, there's not a lot to complain about on this lens when it comes to its optical quality. It's pretty great. It really just comes down to price and what it's trying to do, if that's useful to you. So price-wise, it's more expensive than I was hoping, to be honest. When I looked at some of the recent Sigma lenses where they're going for, in that like $1,000 US price zone, I thought, yeah, that's reasonable. And I looked at what the 18 to 35s are going for now. Mind you, those are APS-C lenses and they're DSLR lenses, so I expected to be a price hike. But they want $1,350 US for this one, which feels maybe a little bit expensive for what it is. Now, it is a unique lens, and it is a 1.8, 28 to 45, which I don't really think exists otherwise. And it is kind of cool that like the 18 to 35 is really popular. And if you take an 18 to 35 and you do the crop factor math on it, you get like a 27 to 50 something. So they're like a 52 maybe. So they're really close to that 27 to 52 with the 28 to 45, but they managed to keep the 1.8 even when on full frame, which means that you'd get lower noise when you compensate for all the aspects of a crop sensor. I guess it's a better lens than the 18 to 35 in some ways, except for the fact that the 18 to 35 was like the most adaptable lens that people were using for everything, Micro Four Thirds and crop sensors and everything. You can even use it on a full frame if you're willing to, either punch in a little bit or use it on the tighter end of the zoom. This lens to me doesn't strike me as that kind of extremely versatile. Everybody's gonna use it for 10 years on every kind of thing. It's more of just like a niche full frame lens that had to be big and heavy in order to be a 1.8, 28 to 45. All that being said, this is kind of where I live. Honestly, a lot of the shots that I do are between 28 and 40. So for me, this is just a faster 28 to 40 zone. So I kind of love it. Again, I just wish it was a little bit cheaper. So I don't have a recommendation or not a recommendation here. I would say that If you are in that focal range, like that's exactly what I need, and I wish that I had a 1.8 instead of a 2.8 option, which is what most other ones are, then I can vouch for this lens being optically sound, and it has all the features, and it performs well, in autofocus and stuff like that. It's not the greatest video lens when you consider how it manual focuses, that it focus breathes a little bit, but it is optically sound. Otherwise, I don't know that it's as broad of appeal as some of other Sigma lenses. This one feels a little bit more niche, but it's cool and it works well. All right, I'm done.